Oh, I feel it. Oh, I feel it in my chest.
Settle in as we delve into personal growth and all things spirituality, bringing connection to all divinity in the most humane.
All right, welcome back to episode 4 of Mindfully Blissed with Jess and Stace today.
Hello, welcome back.
We actually have a really complex topic to talk about today.
Yes.
We are going to talk about understanding and overcoming church hurt.
I'm sure a lot of people have felt the church hurt.
Yeah.
Feeling the call to go to church. Like for me, that was like the first step. And then it drastically changed over like a course of a year. So it'd be really interesting to talk about and see who else has felt the same exact way.
Yeah, because I think this is something that gets shoved under the rug a lot.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of shame that goes along with church hurt. And so it's almost feel isolated, singled out when it happens to somebody.
Yeah. And then you're left feeling lost,
Alone. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, where am I supposed to go from here?
Yeah, exactly. I know.
It's a horrible feeling.
Okay. So I think we should talk about our past journey with church.
Okay.
Because I know for both you and I, it was kind of 2020 was like our aha moment to kind of go back into church.
Yeah.
So why don't you share with us your journey with church leading up to 2020?
Okay. Church started for me, like my family never grew up very religious. However, my dad, his side of his family grew up very Catholic. His mom and a lot of her brothers and maybe sisters, but brothers were like pastors and like, fathers of the church and things like that. And growing up, she actually lived in the parish house next to a Catholic church.
Wow.
And she like ran it or like took care of the house and everything. And so my dad grew up very Catholic, but when we were kids, like there was no going to church, like no memories of going to church with my family. But my childhood best friend, she's decided she kind of wanted to go check out this church that we were in our local town. And none of our parents wanted to go. So we were just kind of like, okay, you guys can go. And I think we were in like 6th grade, like 5th or 6th grade. So we got rides to like youth group and church and stuff like that. And the first thing I remember, like one of the very first things I remember about going to church was they started talking about the rapture. And it was scary. Like the way they talk about the rapture and how fearful, like at 6th grade, middle school, like that's crazy to have your first experience be like, oh, if you don't, accept the Lord Jesus Christ as your savior, you're not going to heaven. What? Like, holy crap. Yeah. So of course we were like, we went, we were like considered Bible thumpers. We had that logo for like, not high school, middle school, because we did like prayer group in the morning. Like we had a group of girls that would get together before school at the school, which is wild now, but we would, pray before school. And so I had that title of a Bible thumper for about the whole middle school years. And then in high school, we still were kind of going. I had met a guy there at church and he was a star of the football team. And like we started dating, and then his mom was very into church. So for like, we would always go to youth group and like all those kinds of things through high school. It wasn't until probably like junior year of high school that I kind of stopped going to church as much. We had kind of broken up. So I kind of went like a different way, and he still went to church and everything. And then fast forward, like moving to Washington now, I didn't go to church or seek out a church at all until about 2020. End of 2020, I started getting that call that was like, there's something more.
Yeah.
And that's where it started, was church. Like, oh, if I'm going to go find God, I gotta go to church.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we actually started going to church until March of 2021. I believe that's the timeline, March of 2021. Yeah. And it was a good experience. Matt didn't want to go at first, so it was just me and the kids. The kids absolutely loved the church, the kids ministry and things like that. And it was really like heartwarming to me to see them, you know, making friends and things like that. And all the people were really warm, welcoming. And I started making friends in the church, and Matt started going, and he would say things that like he felt really off. And I was like, but that's just the way it's supposed to be. And he's like, I don't know. And so I kind of ignored that for a little while, because I don't know why, because I thought that was just the right way to go, was to go to church. And that was, you know, the end all be all. And then there was, I don't remember exactly what the scripture was that the pastor was speaking on, but it was something about like, you know, love God above all else, even like your kids, like all this stuff. I forget what that scripture is. And Matt was like, no, absolutely not. Like, it was a draw the line in the sand. And I was like, but I think they're trying to mean like this. And he's like, no, my kids will always come first.
Yeah, there was a time when Landon and I were doing a Bible study at the time that we were going to church. And I can't remember which book it was in, but I know it was one of the Gospels. It was talking about discipleship. And it said, in order to be a disciple of God, you must hate. And it listed, you know, you must hate your mother, your father, your kids, your brother, your sister, your wife. And I was like, whoa, stop right there.
Yes, I have chills.
I'm like, no. God is love. God is love. And to be a disciple of God would mean that you set an example of that love. And so I just literally stopped our Bible study and looked at Landon and said, this is not from God.
Yes.
And I happened to have Strong's Concordance.
Okay.
Book. And so I went and looked it up in Strong's Concordance. And in the Concordance, the word hate, well, actually, what I should say is the word love is in place of the word hate. So in other words, within the Bible, they put the word hate in place of the word love. That was a big turning point for me. But
So that was the exact same scripture. And Matt was like, absolutely not. This is the end. Like, I'm never going again. And so I was like, I was feeling that hurt. I had just made some friends that I was getting used to hanging out with. And then one experience that I had going to a homeschool moms retreat. And the gals that I was there with were from the church, and we were sitting there, and, you know, we started talking about something that happened with the co-op, and it just was so gossipy. Like, it became very gossipy. And I was like, wow, I just don't feel like this is what leaders of the church should be doing.
The hypocrisy
of it. Like, it just didn't sit well with me. And that was the last time I saw them. And that was the last time I stepped foot in the church. And it was really fast from the point that I was like, hey, Jessica, you got to check out this.
It was very fast.
This church that I just love. And then it was like, literally, like, it came one time, I think, that first time. And then I don't think I went again, or maybe it was like another time after that.
I think
one or
you
two
did,
times.
but like we didn't go for whatever reason, but yeah.
Yeah. So it was and then it was like, nope, that's done.
So my background with church, I guess I'm going to start with my dad and my mom split when I was 2. And so I grew up with my stepfather, who was like totally anti-God. Like, he thought he was God. He had like that God complex, you know? So church wasn't really a part of our life at all. And so kind of around the same age as you was middle school for me, about 7th grade. My best friend in 7th grade, which is really funny because there's times you remind me of her.
Oh, funny.
But they went to a local community church. It was actually right next to my old elementary school.
Oh.
And so they were part of the youth group there, her and her sister and her younger brother. And so I started going with them occasionally and became a part of the youth group. And I enjoyed it, but I think back then at that age, I really just enjoyed the community of it.
Absolutely.
Like being with
I
the
loved
kids
it too.
And then, you know, you'd feel bored during the sermon and, you know, fiddling around. And
yep.
So I think as a child, I didn't pay as close attention to what was being
taught
in church.
Yeah.
Because for me, I was so distracted by just the community of friends. And,
just hanging out and doing, godly things, I guess.
And then we would do like, youth group activities. Like they'd do like a 48-hour fast with the youth group. So we'd all get our sleeping bags and, go sleep at the church. And I think we were allowed to have juice or something like that. So we'd have our juice and we'd all just have a big 48-hour sleepover.
Yeah. Sure. See, fun things, right? They lure you in.
Yeah. And then of course the boys and all that stuff. But aside from that, the other time that I did go to church was in high school, and my mom had split up from my stepdad. They got a divorce, and it was a really hard time for my mom and me and my siblings. So she started taking us to a local church, and we actually had a pretty positive experience at that church. It was a really great community church. Nice. That one I would speak highly of. I was in choir in high school, so I got involved with the church choir there. I don't remember why we stopped going there, but we just stopped going. Yeah.
Huh, interesting.
And then what was always a sort of spiritual battle for me, because I reconnected with my dad when I was 16, because he wasn't a part of my life for about 8 years.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that much time.
Yeah, it was a long time. I still don't know like the whole truth behind it all, but my understanding is my stepdad put a stop to it and or made it difficult. And so my dad just decided to let it go so it wouldn't be so hard on me with the tug of war going on.
Right.
But my dad was a deacon in his church. And it was interesting because my dad and my stepmom were not legally married. And oftentimes in church, you cannot be a leader in the church if you're not legally married.
Right.
So that was really interesting to me. But what was more interesting is my dad was spiritual from both sides, which you and I both now understand. But at the time, it seemed very weird to me that my dad was going to church and reading his Bible and believing in God and praying, but at the same time, he had his crystals and he was meditating and he had psychic abilities and doing all those things as well. And for me, it was so confusing because according to the church,
that's of the devil.
That's of the devil. That is wrong. That is sin. That is sorcery. And so I was always looking at my dad like he was this, I don't even know what word to use, but it was always so confusing to me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so it was hard for me to take my dad seriously when it came to matters of spirituality. But it also was difficult for me to understand spirituality for myself, seeing that and not being able to grasp it because I had been going to church and what I had learned.
So you're like having these mixed emotions like, oh my goodness.
So I finally just decided, you know what? As I became an adult, I was like, I think I'm just agnostic. I believe in God, but I don't believe in religion, and I'm just going to leave it at that. That's kind of where it ended for me into adult life. And so fast forward to 2020, when COVID and all the things were taking place and there was so much hate going on.
Yeah, the world was very dark.
I know for me personally, I lost a lot of friendships through 2020 just because of differences of beliefs and opinions, which was crazy to me. There was a time that like it was okay to be friends with somebody that didn't have the same belief or opinion as you. And then all of a sudden it wasn't okay anymore. It was just like, what is going on?
Yeah, it is pretty wild when you actually look back on it and realize like we were living lives just perfectly fine with different beliefs before that. And then all of a sudden it was shoved in your face for a whole year. And then people were like, oh, we have to all be the same belief system to be friends.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
It was crazy. I know. It was so crazy. So anyway, I just was sort of feeling like what is going on in the world right now. The world's gone insane. And I'm feeling like I need to surround myself with a new community of some sort.
Right.
And Land and I were we were in the car out on a drive, and we drove past a church, and actually pretty close to here. And I I looked at Landon and I said, we should go to church. Go be around some positive people. And, just sort of, it was more about like just kind of seeking that positive community at the time. And that was when that first conversation took place in the car was about spring of 2020, I'd say around May. And then like just before my birthday in the summer, I decided to try and find that church online. And I thought I found it. And then we showed up for our first day at church, and it wasn't the church we had driven past, but we thought, what the heck, we'll just go to this church. And so we started going to church there, and we went to church there for almost 2 years. It was just shy of 2 years until the church hurt took place, which we'll get into here in a minute. And so then we left that church, and it was very painful. And then that was when you found out, and you're like, hey, we're going to this other church. You might really like it. So we started going there. And at first we did. And then church hurt happened again. And I went, okay,
there's a pattern here.
I do not want to be involved in an organization that preaches one thing from the stage and then steps off the stage and does the complete opposite.
Yeah.
That's what blew my mind every time.
Yep.
So,
yeah, it's so interesting. The other thing about church that really just kind of is interesting, and I don't have a whole lot of memory of like what scriptures were taught when I was younger, but I feel like they only teach certain gospels. And
they're always in the gospel.
There's only certain scriptures that they've always just taught over the whole years of Christianity that I can remember. And there's so many other scriptures that I have now personally come across that are like, teach of love and light and God is within you and all these things.
Yes.
And so it's like, how can this be in the Bible, but it's not being taught in a church?
Right. They're not sharing that. No.
Yeah. Because it goes against,
excuse me. I think
what I believe the church is like an organization, I don't like to use the word cult, but I feel like a church
pretty
is
close to that
culty
in the way
too.
that they're operating in the two. And I'm not going to say this about every church because there are really great churches out there. But in the two that I have most recently experienced, in the end, that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah.
It was very like this sort of cultish behavior that is the way that I see it, especially within a Christian church, because that's what we were going to, is that everybody should be welcome and everybody should be treated equally, regardless of your position in the church or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And everybody should be treated the same. We are all God's children. That sort of that, unconditional love. And when it's not like that, that's when I take a step back and I go, wait, this isn't right. This isn't right. Yeah. So, I just want to really quick touch base on what church hurt is for those listening, but really, church hurt is spiritual abuse. And I know when I used that term at the first church where we experienced church hurt, they did not like me throwing out that word abuse, but it is. It's spiritual abuse that causes pain and emotional damage from the negative experiences that you have there. So that's what church hurt is. And for those watching or listening, I've got notes in front of me because it's a really complex topic and I want to make sure we cover everything. But I think now that we've gotten through our church journey, is what comes to mind, like without having the experiences you've had, negative or positive, like when you just first think of church, or like back in 2020 when you thought about going back to church, like what were the things that came to mind when you think of church?
Well, when I got that calling, I got the calling to seek God, to seek the source of all creation, right? And then you automatically just associate that with church. And so I was just like, oh, yes, like community, like positive people who are speaking life over you and wanting to see you better yourself and things like that. I was like, we need that in our life so much. And it is that way for a little bit. Yeah. They wow you they purposely come up to you those first couple of times that you're there, and they, they kill you with kindness to where you are like, oh yeah, this is perfect. I need
Oh, this is great. Look at this great community. This is what I needed. Yes.
Yes. And then there's just those little things that start creeping in and you're like, I don't feel like that's the way it's supposed to be.
No.
And all these rules and regulations. And yeah, I can't wait to dive into, you've experienced actual church hurt.
Yeah. It was traumatic.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that.
So I do feel fortunate that I never had to deal with like anything like crazy. I feel like the only church hurt I really experienced personally was when the co-op fell through, like between the leaders of the co-op and the church leaders that were not in control, but overseeing the co-op. I've never seen so much immaturity in grown adults in my life.
Yeah.
And I was hurt. My kids were hurt. They were literally ready to go to their first day of co-op the next day. And I got a silly Facebook message from the creators of the co-op that just like they were inside the church, recorded this video saying that it was something went down and there wasn't going to be any co-op and to meet at this park at 10 a.m. the next morning so we could hear her side of it. And I looked at Matt and we're like,
right?
What is this?
I know.
And then to receive the text messages and the emails from the leader of the church that was overseeing the co-op, I just could not. I was like, this is being handled so wrong. Nobody was thinking about the kids involved in this at all.
No.
And I tried to give it another go, but I wanted nothing to do with it after that.
Yeah.
It was the done deal at that point.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Church, it's supposed to be a place of solace, a place where you go, you get unconditional love. You have a community there to support you in all things, your struggles in your life without judgment.
Yep.
Without feeling oppressed or manipulated or, all those things. And a lot of people go to church seeking those things and that positive, uplifting community and all that. And then when you experience the complete opposite, it's like a mind
devastating.
Fuck.
Yes, absolutely.
And
you just reminded me of one other thing that stands out to me that I was wanting to do, which just made me think that this was all for the wrong reasons. They're doing these things for the wrong reasons. Is I came to a place where I wanted to be baptized. And I had never felt that way before.
Yes.
I had never felt like I wanted to be baptized. And I got to experience a baptism at this church. And it was like inside the room in like a tub looking thing. And I was like, well, that's not really like what I want. Like, I'm such a nature girl. Like, I just want to be out in the nature and things like that. And so I had reached out.
Which to me sounds way more blissful.
Right?
To be connected to spirit, God, source, the good in that way.
Yeah. And so I wanted to be baptized in a natural body of water. And I reached out to who I knew in the church to see if they could talk to the pastor about it and things like that. And it took like a week. And finally I reached back out and I was like, so like, do you think this is possible to get, baptized? And she just responded and she's like, well, it's not really what the church wants to do. They really like to be these baptisms to be, recorded and on a, big screen so the whole church can see it. And I was just like,
the production.
I didn't even respond because what you have somebody in the church who wants to connect
so
their
it's
life
not about
to God.
It's not about my spiritual growth and my spiritual journey. It's not about you being here to support my spiritual growth, my spiritual journey, or anybody else's for that matter, but it's about the production that you get to put on
for the church. Yep.
For the church's benefit, not yours.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was like, absolutely not. This is bullshit.
Yeah. Right.
You're basically denying my baptism because it can't be displayed on a TV for the whole congregation.
Yeah.
Okay. That just drew a line in the sand right there.
Yeah.
So I had to say that because that was a huge red flag.
I remember you telling me about that and I was just like, what?
Yeah.
Like, had there been another reason, like maybe, but for it to be about the production. That's what
Yeah.
blows my mind.
And if you really think about it, if they wanted it to be such a production, they still could have had a couple of people go record
the
it.
lead pastor of that church often recorded videos outside of church. So there's no reason why they couldn't have done that.
Yeah. And then displayed it like on a Sunday service. Like,
Yeah.
look what we did over the, week.
It was so beautiful. Staci requested this and look at how beautiful it was. And
Yeah. But nope. So he's like, oh, well, I'll baptize myself in a bachelor body of water then. Be like, who is that? I think I just read that in Mary Magdalene Revealed. I think it's Thecla.
Mhm.
Is that how you pronounce her name?
I think so.
She was denied baptism too.
Yeah.
And she baptized herself.
Yeah.
So I was like, power to you.
I know. It's like, see? Yeah.
You don't need a church.
No. Okay. So I want to dive into the experiences I had. It's kind of funny because there was sort of the grand finale of the church hurt at the first church. But there were definitely things leading up to it that I'll touch on first because it was sort of this buildup. So when we first started going to that church, it was in summer of 2020. And so the mask mandates were in place. A lot of churches were shut down.
Mhm.
And so this one was open, but they had, the seats and the congregation are all separated, so you'd have to go in and RSVP how many people are coming in your group so that they could put, so many chairs together for your group. But there was hardly anybody going. So it was just,
it's pretty
it
small,
was just
quaint,
Landon and I and my mom, and we're just there. And because there was nobody there, well, we also started going over the course of a change of leadership. So the pastors that were in place at that time, the lead pastors, they'd been there for years and they were in the process of passing the baton to a new husband and wife to lead the church. So we kind of were there to witness all of that take place.
Mhm.
And we thought it was really cool actually at the time. So the pastors who were up to take the baton eventually, they were coming up to us all the time and welcoming us to the church. And the pastor's wife in particular, she would always come up and talk to us. And her and I talked on the phone several times. And I really liked her.
Yeah.
And then as things started to go back to normal, so to speak, post-COVID, and, everybody started to come back to church, the masks are getting taken off and all the things are going back to normal. And now at this point, the baton has been passed. They now have leadership over the church. All of a sudden, we are no one. We are small potatoes. She doesn't have time for me. She's got her clique there at the church. And, they have these cards that you can fill out on how you want to help serve in the church.
Okay.
And I kid you not, I probably filled the same card out like 20 times because I was interested in being involved with the worship team.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also interested in being involved with the women's ministry because of my background with leading women.
Yeah.
That I thought that I, had something to bring to the table to really just sort of spice up, the activities and stuff within the women's ministry to bring the women together in a really positive way. And they would always stand up every Sunday, stand up on that stage and announce, hey, if you're interested in serving the church, be sure to fill out one of our cards. So finally I was like, how many times do I have to fill one out?
Yeah, no kidding.
So the first time I finally went to the pastor's wife, because she was the head of the worship team and the head of the women's ministry, which I found really interesting to be the pastor's wife and you're leading all these things.
Yeah.
It was kind of a little bit of a red flag to me, especially being such a big church, like let
other people take
some roles and be involved in the church. So I approached her about the worship team and I'd filled out a card and I would really love to get involved. And she said, oh, well, you have to sign up for an audition. I
audition for the worship team?
I paused because I was like, wait, what? Like, did I hear that right?
Yeah, you're offering your services.
And she said, you have to audition. And I was like, I don't think I want to do that. I'll pass. I don't want to be on the worship team now.
Yeah, because then you're putting yourself in a position they're either going to accept you or they're going to say you don't sing well enough.
Well, it wasn't even about that to me. It was more about, this isn't American Idol. This is church. And if somebody feels called to worship the Lord in front of the congregation or lead, or, they just feel called to do that, who are you to shut that down by way of audition?
Yeah.
I was so turned off by that.
That kind of goes in hand with like the production.
I was just going to go into that. And I've noticed that with a lot of churches now, there's so much emphasis put on the production now that it's almost like, oh, go to a church for a concert.
Right.
The beginning of church is this big concert.
Some of these huge churches now, it's crazy, like light shows, like crazy.
And that's not what it's supposed to be about.
No.
And so that I just that really took me aback, and I really started sort of watching and observing a lot. And then as far as the women's ministry goes, I finally, because the leaders that were in place prior to them were still at the church at the time. And so I reached out to the old pastor's wife, and I called her on the phone, and I said, hey, I've been trying to get involved with women's ministry, because at this time I didn't know that the other pastor's wife was leading it. And she said, oh, well, you're going to have to reach out to so-and-so. She's leading it now. I was like, well, I've tried filling out the cards. I'm not getting no one's reaching out to me. And I told her about my background and how I wanted to help. And so she said she'd pass the message along, and nothing really happened. And then, so it was kind of from that point forward, I started really watching the women's ministry. So every fall, they do this big, I forget what they call it, but it's just like this big fancy dinner for the women's ministry, and they have speakers, and so you can volunteer to take on a table, and they do these really fancy displays on the tables and all this stuff. So I went to her and said, I'd love to help with this event. And so I started talking about stuff. So basically my role in it was to create an activity in the beginning as the women were showing up, and just to really get the women connected, because oftentimes at church it's really cliquey, and the same people are always talking with one another. So my goal was let's get people, do a little activity that'll get people talking with other people, and the energy in there was amazing. Like the whole thing was so good. And I had prizes for those who found their partner first and stuff like that. So I had a lot of fun with that. But after that was it. It was just crickets again. And my mom and I both had some experiences where we felt sort of pushed aside when it came to the women that were in the leadership roles in the church, and they all had their little clique. Yeah. And at times there were some of them that could be quite nasty.
Yeah. And that feels so terrible.
Yeah.
When you're supposed to, be in a...
It was a turnoff more than anything. It was just like, what?
Yeah.
That's not here.
Right.
Not here.
That's where you're supposed to not have those feelings, right?
Yeah. So the big kicker really was, what I did get involved with was the children's ministry. And so I volunteered a lot with the kids, and I got to know the children's pastor really well. And I was really fond of him, and Landon took to him really well, and he'd relate to Landon. Oh, I was an only child growing up too. I get you, man. I get you, And the first incident that took place with the children's pastors was they had a field trip. They went to, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. It was like an observatory, sort of. And we were not told that masks were required. Now, regardless of what anyone's views are on masks, they made Landon sick. Yeah. Every time he'd wear a mask, he would get sick, and he'd get styes in his eyes. So that was a no-go for Landon. They didn't say that masks were required. And I had taught Landon to stand up for his body when it came to mask wearing, because it makes him sick. And so he's on this field trip. I'm not there. And they tried to make him wear a mask, and he said no. And they told him he was being disrespectful and all these things. They told him to put it on. So finally he puts it on, but under its nose. And then they didn't like that. So then he took it off and threw it on the ground. And then they took him outside and separated him from the rest of the kids. And then I got a phone call from one of the pastors, and I said, well, he did the right thing. And they're like, what? I said, no one's going to make my child do something that harms his body.
Yeah.
It makes him sick.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, they're required here. And that's disrespectful if he's not wearing one. You're disrespecting my child's body.
Absolutely.
I was so blown away by that. And I told them, I said, well, if there's any disrespect here, it's that you failed to inform the parents that they'd be required.
Yeah, 100%.
So there was that. But the final incident that took place at that church, I was also volunteering, because I got really involved with all the kids. So I was also volunteering with the STARS group, which was for girls. I forget what the age group was, but it like went up to like 5th or 6th grade. And it was at the end, and I was in the classroom helping clean stuff up and put stuff away. And all of a sudden, the lead pastor for the children's ministry comes in, storming in, raising his voice there. And now, mind you, there's parents picking up these girls from the STARS program. So there's other instructors that were in the room with me. There's parents, there's kids in the room. He comes storming in the room. Landon's trailing behind him in tears. Jessica, can I speak to you outside? God. And Landon looks at me and he goes, because I looked at Landon and I mouthed and I was like, what did you do? And he said, I didn't do anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? So he takes us outside. He isolates us from everyone else. It's just me, him, and Landon, and starts telling me what went down and that so basically there was an altercation that took place between Landon and the lead pastor's son. Not his son, but the lead pastor's son, who had picked on Landon multiple times and his friends. And when Landon finally informed somebody of what had happened, this particular pastor had asked Landon what he thought should happen. And he said he should be in trouble. He should be disciplined.
Landon said that to the...
Yeah, because the pastor said, well, do you think he should be disciplined? And Landon was like, yeah. So he looks at me in the midst and he's telling me, and he goes, he said he should be disciplined, Jessica. Discipline! He's like screaming at me. And I'm like,
in the world?
I was like, whoa. Like, I was so shocked, like I was at a loss for words.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And the thing that was really uncomfortable for me was that he isolated us. So he's having this moment of feeling free to speak to us however he feels with no one else witnessing this behavior.
Yeah. You would think that they would bring in one other person to witness whatever is going down.
So finally, after this long drawn out conversation of him being so worked up and just putting Landon down and screaming and yelling, and he walks off, and Landon and I are both in tears. And so of course I'm hugging Landon, and I finally get him to a place of being calm enough to tell me what happened. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what? So basically what happened was this kid was picking on Landon, calling him names, pushing him, all these, hitting him. And this actually happened before the class started.
Okay.
And so he waited the whole class time. And then at the end went to tell this child's mom, who's the lead pastor's wife, so-and-so did this to me. And she turned around and looked at Landon and said, well, that's not my problem. And the children's pastor was right there, and he heard her say that. So then he took matters into his hands and pulled Landon aside and talked to Landon. And then that's when he asked Landon, well, what do you think should be done? And Landon, do you think he should be disciplined? And Landon said, yeah. And then that's what he was so angry about, that he came storming into the STARS classroom.
Wow.
And now this was 2 days before Landon and the boys were supposed to be going on a camping trip for the weekend. This was Thursday. They were supposed to be leaving, it was the next day.
So you're like, no.
And I had just given them a check that night prior to the class. And I was Landon and I get in the car, and I was like, Landon, camp is tomorrow. And we're both still crying. I'm like, camp is tomorrow. And he goes, I don't want to go. I said, then we have to go back in and go tell him.
Mm-hmm.
So I go back in, and at this point, everybody's like trickled out. We're in the lobby, and I'm waiting for him to finish speaking to somebody, and then they leave. And I go up to him and I said, I just wanted to let you know, Landon no longer wants to go to camp tomorrow. So please rip up the check or give it back to me.
Yeah.
He looks at Landon after I said that, and he goes, I'm so disappointed in you.
Oh my gosh.
And Landon's face just drops, and he just starts crying so hard. I looked at him and I said, if you have something to say, you can say it to me. He's had enough from you.
Yeah.
Enough.
To tell a child they're disappointing you is crazy.
There were a lot of other things he said. It's been so long now that I don't remember, but the things that were coming out of his mouth, it was one put down after another. He was literally just emotionally beating Landon down.
Yeah.
And I'm just, and he looks at me, and I have tears rolling down my face.
Yeah.
And I finally just took Landon. I got in the car, and I just sat there. We're both crying. I called my mom, because my mom was really involved with the church as well.
Mm-hmm.
She volunteered every morning. She was either greeting or serving coffee. I called my mom, and I told her what happened, and she was like, what? So, I'm almost done with this part of the story, but we tried to figure out like what to do, because we knew leadership was very close-knit, but there was a husband and wife that had recently come into the church on the staff. I mean, yes, leadership, but they were paid a lot of the leadership was paid staff at this church.
Oh, interesting.
But we decided to reach out to him because he was so new to the staff that we thought that he wouldn't be so biased to anyone.
Makes sense.
That's not what ended up happening. We ended up meeting him at a park, told him what happened, and basically in the long run, they ended up via email gaslighting. And there was never any resolution. We requested to have meetings with those involved and having other people in the room as well to sort of lead the discussion. And they told us in an email that what we would not be talking about, that we can have this conversation, but here's what we won't be talking about. And I was like, wait, what? This is church. This is where I should be able to come to you as a leader and talk about something that's bothering me, and you help or even pray over it. There was no prayer. There was no. So that was sort of the end of it, but it was very, very, it's hard to explain it in words. Like, it was very traumatic. We cried for months.
Yeah.
We'd drive past the church. We'd cry.
Yeah.
We'd start talking about finding a new church. We'd cry. It was really painful.
Yeah, because those are things that you should not ever experience in a church. When you're trying to come closer to God, you should not be experiencing those kinds of things.
No, that's why I was so like, and even with the entire situation with the children's pastor and Landon, there was never any prayer involved. There was never like, let's pray about this. Let's go get the other child. Let's find some resolution. You know, we're all God's children, and we're brothers and sisters of God, and we need to love each other. And
that's what you would think,
right?
Would be the route.
It was just put down after put down, and I just was like, this is not
acceptable behavior.
So, I mean, just all the things that led up to that moment, and then that taking place was the end for me. And then you were like, hey, come to this new church. It's really great. And it started out to be really great. And you stopped going. And we were there. We'd been going for probably, I want to say, about 8 months or so, 7 months. And it was a small church. So it was one of the things I loved about it. Really small community family feel, like it wasn't a large church.
It was amazing.
Yeah,
people
it was
came
so good.
The thing I loved about it was people came as they were. There was no like, some people who wanted to get dressed up for church were dressed up. But people who just wanted to be in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie, that was acceptable too. And I loved that you could be dressed up, but it wasn't like this like you had to.
Right.
You could just show up as yourself.
One of my favorite things about that church that really kept us going was that they would do fellowship every single Sunday after church. That you'd go into like the little living room area
and have some snacks,
coffee,
and
talk.
drink.
I loved that. But on this particular Sunday, it was really interesting because as they were growing, they were starting membership at the church. And so the lead pastor announced the first new members of the church who like first came onto the membership. And one of the volunteers at the church who would normally be sitting in the congregation, she had volunteered with the kids that day. So she came up to me during fellowship afterwards and was like, "Oh, did you happen to see who the first new members were?" And so I said, "Yeah, so-and-so and so-and-so." And I was like, "I wish I could have been up there, but it hasn't worked out yet for my mom and I to go to the class." And then she looks at me and says, "Well, I don't think you should become a member until you come clean with the lead pastors about your relationship." What? Okay, just so everybody knows, my husband and I are not legally married for our own reasons. We've been together for 20 years. We have a almost 13-year-old son. He'll be 13 tomorrow. Very healthy relationship. We love each other. We just have our reasons for not wanting to have the law involved with our marriage.
Didn't want the government involved.
Yeah. So that's that.
I could go back.
So I was like really taken back by what she said. And now the reason she knew this was because we'd had a conversation during fellowship one day, and I forget how it came up, but it was just a natural conversation. It's like, "Oh, well, we're not legally married, and it's great, whatever."
Yeah.
So that's how she knew. And now all of a sudden she's using it to be like, "Well, you can't do this because you don't have a marriage certificate." And I'm like, "What?" So I looked at her and I said, "Well, why does that matter?"
Yeah.
And she turns around and she says, "Well, because you're afraid of divorce." And I was like, "According to whom?" And she goes, "Well, that's why you won't get a marriage license, because you're afraid of divorce." So I looked at her and I said, "So let me ask you a question. Why do you have a marriage license?" And she goes, "Well, it solidifies the commitment." I said, "Oh, so you're afraid that without the license, there'd be divorce or separation."
Yeah. See, it goes the opposite way.
And she looked at me with these really big eyes like, "How dare you?"
Yeah. But that's
And
the truth.
I looked at her and I said, "It doesn't feel good, does it?"
To be judged.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy.
You know nothing about me or my relationship, and you're just gonna
and tell me where it says in the Bible that you have to have the government involved in your marriage.
That was
I'm pretty sure that marriage is between two people and God.
Right. Exactly.
When did the church and the government come, in bed together?
So that's funny because that came up. So I went home that Sunday and I thought, I have no problem calling the lead pastors and letting them know this information. In fact, I'd rather be interested to hear what their thoughts are on this.
Yeah, and almost educate them.
If this is because if this is going to be an issue, we're going to have an issue.
Yeah.
So I called and let them know, and they asked if I'd meet them at the church later date. So I went, and they pulled out a voice recorder and said they'd be recording the conversation so that they could share it with the other leaders of the church when they would come to making a decision whether I was worthy of church membership or not.
This just sounds so silly, just like, without even going further.
Why I'm saying it in such a silly way, because I'm just like, I remember sitting there going, "Okay, what are we doing?" But okay. And I brought a book with me. I forget the title of it, but it really breaks down the law and God when it comes to licenses, and it's actually a handbook for sheriffs and I think lawyers when it comes to the law and God, especially like within the Constitution and whatnot. So
interesting.
I brought that with me because it explains marriage licensing in there. So I wanted to share with them why we don't have a marriage license. And I did. I shared all that. They interviewed me about our relationship, about mine and Scott's relationship, how we met, where we met, How long were we together before we lived together? How long were we together before we had a child? How long did we live together before we had a child? I mean, it was just one question of our entire relationship. When did you decide to commit to one another? Did you exchange vows? It was just like this whole interview. And I remember going home after this whole interview process going,
what does any of this matter?
What does it matter? And why is this any of your business? As the church leaders, this is none of your business. This is between us and God.
Yeah. See, this is when it kind of gets kind of culty to me.
Right.
When you have these kinds of things and they're prying for this kind of information just to be on...
Just to be a member of the church.
Yeah, it's really weird. Yeah.
So we were supposed to, I think we had 2 meetings that all this played out. We were supposed to have another one, and I decided I was done because I decided I didn't want to be part of something where I'm going to where there's even the possibility of me being ostracized or shunned, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then when I use those words, the first thing that comes to mind is cult.
Yes.
Right?
So it's almost like they're making you prove your worth, which is sickening to me. Like, we should never have to prove our worth. Like, we're worthy of it all.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's crazy.
Yeah. So after those 2 experiences, I just thought, you know what? I'm done. And it's been a journey. Obviously, having you in my life has been a really strong part of that journey post church hurt.
Yeah. Because it's crazy. It's a crazy journey because it just opens a lot more things when you can start taking other cultures' biblical texts and ancient texts. And like, you're actually, when you're just focused on church and just the Bible, it's so narrow.
Right.
Your view.
Right.
But when you can actually take different texts from all around the world, you get this bigger picture. And if people could actually like realize how similar all of these texts are, they're just different labels or names, or, you know, that's just changed slightly. But the main part of the stories are all the same. And so it's crazy to me that one religion thinks that they have the one-way truth to all, and that every single person in the whole entire world can't go to heaven unless they convert to Christianity. So you're telling me that kids born in, you know, like born Buddhist into a Buddhist family never, you know, goes out into the United States, never knows what Christianity is.
Right.
You're telling me they're not going to go to heaven? Like, you're no. I just can't get behind it.
I know. It's crazy. Well, it's funny. I wanted to bring this up because it's a conversation I had. And this is just to kind of touch on, well, one of my takeaways from the church hurt sort of aha moments is that when you're going to church, well, first of all, they're in the Gospels a lot. Luke, Mark, Matthew, John. And that was one of my aha moments coming out of it. Is like, did you ever notice that whenever they're giving sermon, they're always in the Gospels? And yeah, they'll go off and cite, you know, some scripture from other books in the Bible, but they're always focused in the Gospels, always. So it's really interesting. There was a conversation, something I posted recently on social media, and I was talking about God is within you. Like, you don't need church, you don't need this, you don't need that. God is within you. Seek God in your heart. So she said to me, well, but the Lord says in John 14:6 in the Gospel, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So she was trying to prove a point. Okay. So what I first want to point out is, in the end, what I realized in this conversation is she's so stuck on that particular Bible verse. Why?
Yeah.
Somebody has ingrained this verse into her brain because if you read through John chapter 14 a little bit further, I'm just going to point this out because I want it to be known that you don't have to be treated in any way that you're uncomfortable with to go to church and have a relationship with God.
Absolutely.
Okay, so she cited John 14:6, which is, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And then if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. So if you go further down, 14:9, Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I've been among you such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. Very truly, I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these because I am going to the Father. And I will do whatever you ask in my name so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything in my name and I will do it. This is a little bit different. This is the NIV version. I think I was reading the King James version before, but it's multiple times in here that he states that the Father is in me. The Father is in you. And so I thought that was really interesting that she pointed out 14:6, saying that I am the way and the truth and the life. And here I'm trying to tell you. And so what I ended up saying was like, have you read through the rest of that chapter?
Yeah. A lot of pastors, they find texts to back up the rest of what they want to say.
Right.
Their, indoctrination of it. And what people don't realize is Jesus Christ was not his name.
Right. Yeshua.
It was never Christ. What Christ is representing is Christ consciousness.
Right.
So it's saying the way, the truth, and the light is through me, not the human Yeshua, but Christ consciousness.
Right. Exactly. You will learn from me what I have found and learned.
Yes. And that's what he and, Buddha and Muhammad, like all of these, they were all Christs. And they were trying to show the people this connection to God within. And I mean, there's scripture that Jesus went to the Pharisees and said, the God that you serve is not the Father. And it's there in black and white text. And people to this day are still like, that's the way. No. So what I personally believe is that people in churches are actually worshiping Satan. And I know a lot of people are not going to like that.
Right.
It's going to trigger a lot of people.
Right.
But when you read a text that says that Jesus is going to the Pharisees in the Roman times to say, your God is not my God.
Yeah.
What is that saying?
Right.
Like, ooh, that's scary.
Right.
And then you start adding all the other little things in your own personal experience with church. And you're like, Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Because a lot of it doesn't seem godly.
Right.
Right. And so that's when I started actually, instead of just taking what a pastor has to say and these certain scriptures to just focus on, take your own experience and read the Bible for yourself. Read farther past these little scriptures that they're trying to prove a point with, and see what it actually is trying to unfold and tell you, because you're going to be blown away.
I'm finding that when people do Bible studies, I don't know if you've ever gone, but when the first church we were going to in 2020, they did, what do they call it? Growth groups is what they called it. And so once a week, you'd go to someone's house. So there'd be like a 3-month time period. And once a week, you're going to the same person's house with the same group of people. And it's like a Bible study.
Yeah.
But everybody who was in a growth group were all studying the same thing at the same time. And it's really interesting to watch how people either overanalyze or underanalyze scripture.
Yeah.
They take it too literal or not literal enough.
Yeah.
And and it's funny because I'd go through these growth groups and I just kind of listen and chime in every now and then. But it's more the hindsight now where I'm looking back going, oh my gosh, it really has made me realize sort of the coercion or manipulation that takes place, and in some ways oppression, because you lose yourself when you're going to church and they're constantly driving certain scripture into your brain, and you start living your life based off of that. You lose yourself, and you actually, in the process of losing yourself, are losing your connection with God. So that's been one of my big takeaways in, hindsight, is that I feel more connected to God now than I did when I was going to church.
Yes. And that's what spirituality to me is coming back to the self.
Yeah.
When you actually start working on yourself and filling your cup up, and then you can love on other people. And that's the way Jesus was teaching,
example.
Because you are taking care of yourself and making yourself a priority. And that just trickles off into.
And Jesus wasn't going to church.
No, exactly.
No, Jesus was out leading the way and loving on people. Yeah.
Yes. He wasn't judging the prostitutes and the leprosy people. And he was loving
on
them.
Everyone.
Yeah. So if you're ever in a church and you're facing judgment, know that is the opposite of what you should be feeling.
And there were times Jesus, or Yeshua, got angry at times too.
Yes.
Yeah. So when, they talk about, anger is a bad emotion. No, God gave us anger for a reason.
Yes.
Anger can keep us safe.
Yeah. That's our ego.
Yeah.
Our ego is anything that's on an energetic scale that is fear, guilt, and shame. That's all of our ego. And that's all of what people depict Satan or the devil is, just operating out of the ego, which is being too wrapped up in earthly things. Materialistic things, sexual things, like all these earthly pleasures,
right?
That we, it's okay to do them in moderation. But anytime you're going over and operating too much out of the ego, then that's when things can be sinful or, sinful. But I mean, not going to church has opened my eyes, and reading, it's just made me want to read more and more things from different cultures. And before even, Christianity became a thing, and that's what a lot of people don't really understand, is Christianity, the label of Christianity didn't even come till 400 years after Jesus's teachings.
Right.
So there you go. He wasn't Christian at all.
Well, and actually some of the original practices within Christianity are now deemed pagan.
Yeah, well, Constantine, who rewrote the Bible, the King James Version, was pagan.
Yeah. So and that's a whole nother conversation. So for those of you that may or may not, or know somebody that has experienced church hurt, I just kind of wanted to go over just sort of the causes of church hurt to be on the lookout for. There's the authoritarian leadership. So that's sort of like when I was talking about the pastor's wife. She had excessive control over things, sort of manipulating other women so that her ego would be on top.
Yeah.
It's that whole hypocrisy, do as I say, not as I do, and you feel betrayed or disillusioned. The legalism, which was happening at the second church for me, with, the rules and regulations. You can't be a member unless you're this, and there's no grace or compassion for why you've made the choices you've made in your life. And so then you're judged and condemned. And so that's another one. And then there's the emotional and spiritual abuse, like what took place with Landon and I at the first church. And that one is the one that can leave the really deep emotional scars and trauma. Took a long time to get past that. Then there's the exclusion and judgment. So whether you're being judged or excluded because of your own beliefs, the way you live, your lifestyle, your own personal struggles. And then the last one is the alliance, when it's a paid staff and they have their alliance, they, above all else, are going to protect their income before they look out
Mm-hmm.
for what's good for you. And that is not the way of God.
Yeah. Original churches didn't have paid members.
No.
Well, and honestly,
I personally don't think any church staff should be paid because it sort of convolutes the whole purpose of church.
well, right. And now that the church is in bed with the government, they're getting government funds to fund the church itself, most of them. And then they're asking for, tithings from the congregation. So,
And have you ever
kind of strange.
This is going to be funny to point out, but I know I'm not the only one that pays attention to this. I know I've heard someone else say it, so I'm just going to throw it out there, but the shoes.
The shoes.
Have you ever paid attention to paid church staff's shoes when they're on stage? They are always brand new. They are always
crisp, clean shoes. Oh,
like, who's paying for those? I mean, that's neither here nor there, but it's just a funny point to bring up because I've heard it before where it's like the shoes, they always have new shoes on, always. They always have bright, brand new, sparkly new shoes on all the time.
Yeah.
It was something I always paid attention to.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just at one church, it was
multiple.
Yeah.
That's so weird. I don't know if I ever really paid attention to the shoes that.
If they got shiny new shoes on every Sunday, then they're being overpaid.
Yeah. That was what I really liked about the church that we were going to, is nobody was a paid staff member there, which was nice.
Yes. No, that was one of the things I liked. There was a lot of things that drew me to that church, but then with the whole, oh, you shall possibly be shunned because you don't have a marriage license.
Yeah. Like, oh, how does that change me as a person?
Yeah.
Wild.
There's obviously a lot of profound effects that come out of church hurt. There's really sort of this, I don't want to say this really happened for me, but I know I've heard of others talking about it, sort of this loss of faith or confusion around spirituality, because some people are left feeling like they did something wrong.
Right.
And that actually breaks my heart, because that's obviously, when it comes to church hurt, is not the case.
Mm-hmm. And when you experience church hurt, you automatically shun God, the creator. And that's not, doesn't have anything to do with it.
Typically, that is the case. For me personally, it actually had the opposite effect for me.
Well, same for me too.
Yeah.
But a lot of
them,
we're very you and I both like to seek out things.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, they just shut down. They're like, oh, because they don't know to look.
They lose faith.
Yeah. And they don't know to look elsewhere for, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so when they're like, oh, God's just a part of church. And so I don't want anything to do with church. So I don't believe in God.
Well, yeah. And then there's also this loss of self because, like I said before, you get so wrapped up in the way that you live and the choices that you're making, and everything is sort of revolved around what's being spoken over you at church.
Mm-hmm.
And so you almost lose yourself in the process of going through the church hurt, and sort of this confusion of where do I belong now?
Yeah.
And where am I at in my life? And what is my relationship to God? And what do I believe now? And, all these questions and feelings of guilt and shame and confusion, and sort of also experiencing that loss of community, because especially when you get involved in a church in the way that my family did, we were always at church. We were always serving, volunteering, even, things throughout the week. And all of a sudden it's just gone.
Yeah.
And it's so this huge loss of community.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, so let's talk about how they get past it.
Oh yeah. Let's give them the good stuff now.
Yeah. I will say be patient because it requires a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
It took from the time of the initial church hurt from the first church and it's only been really recent that I've really sort of come out of that. from both churches now. It has been about a year and a half. It's about the time it's taken to really come out of that hurt. Yeah. So you gotta allow time and be patient.
It's a roller coaster. I really have to give a little shout out to my husband, Matt, because I can't really even imagine what it must have felt like for him, because I was leading the way. Right. So it was my awakening that kind of
my husband too
started all of this. And I was like, we need to go to church. No, we can't go to church. And then it's like all these things. And he's kind of like, okay.
Well, Scott did the same thing Matt did. He went to church with us at the first one a couple times, not back to back, but like, and every time he was just like, I don't want to go back.
Yeah, it's weird that they both had that, like, they could feel it right away. They were like, mm-mm. But it's weird how we were kind of like blinded by it. But I think we were searching for something else.
Yeah.
And that was fueling that. So we were like,
community.
Mm-hmm. And then so it's been a long road of like really trying to figure out like what to believe. And then there was a stage of mine that I was just gaining a lot of knowledge. So I was watching like all sorts of different people speak about different things, and I could get behind like some of their views and not other views. Right. And then it was kind of like, then I was in a cluster in my head then being like, oh my God, what am I supposed to believe in?
Yeah. This tug of war of all this information that you're fueling into your brain, and you're like, but wait, this is opposite of this, but it makes sense. Yeah. And then finally like pulling it all together.
Coming back to the self.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at now. And that's where my peace is at now, because I've figured it out, and I'm still learning, but I figured out that there's no answers outside of yourself.
No.
So if you're constantly searching for it, you're never going to find the answer until you start seeking.
What's interesting to me is I knew this back in my early 30s.
Isn't that wild?
Because that's how I was living my life back then. Mm-hmm. And I remember that was some of the most profound moments of my life was like my early to mid 30s. And that's how I was living my life at that time.
Interesting.
And so then, going to church, and like the whole time going to church, I remember always feeling less than.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
I always felt less than when I was going to church. Like I'm not good enough. Or another aha moment that you don't think about when you're there, but now in hindsight, again. So at the end of sermon, you have worship time, and then there's the sermon. And I don't know if this is the case at every church, but the churches that I was going to, this is what was taking place. At the end of church, they start playing that really soft, sort of melancholy music.
Mm-hmm.
If you're experiencing struggles in your life, and if there's something that's bothering you, come down and we'll pray with you, which is great. Except what I've come to realize is every Sunday, you start out on this high, the concert, the production.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the end, they bring you back down and sort of invite you to take inventory on everything that's wrong with your life.
Yeah.
And so you leave church as that being the last piece.
Yeah, that's icky.
And so that's also been one of my sort of, aha moments of looking back on everything, is like, wow, they pump you up in the beginning and everything's woohoo. And then you have sermon.
Yeah.
And they shove all this information into your brain. And then at the end, you're left feeling guilty and shameful. And
yeah. Which is the lowest vibration possible.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. So, I will say, for me personally, and this isn't to say that this is what's best for anyone going through church hurt, but for me personally, seeking support, and that doesn't necessarily mean professional.
Mm-hmm.
If professional is needed, then you can. But I have found support through friends and family, especially Staci.
Yeah.
Staci has been a big part of my healing journey, and I thank you. So I'm going to start crying.
Don't even do it. You're welcome.
But really, in cultivating a supportive community around you, and even if that means like you're going out and sort of leading the way and being the example to others on how we really should be loving on one another and lifting each other up. And that's something I'm actually working on with Staci, and we'll talk about that more in another episode. You could go find a new church. There are good ones out there. I just haven't found the one that is like, and I personally have no interest in going back to one anytime soon. And yeah, just lean on your friends and family and really focus on yourself. Taking that time for self-care, whether it's journaling, whether it's physical activity, whether it's cooking, just whatever brings you joy and connects you back to yourself.
Yeah.
That's been a huge part for me. Yeah. I started journaling too recently. And I will say, and I know some of them aren't going to like what I'm going to say, and that's okay because everybody's on their own journey. But for my journey, connecting with my spirit guides, and for those of you sort of raising an eyebrow, which I know some of you are, and naturally I would have been doing the same thing a year and a half ago. Your spirit guides are there, appointed by God.
Yeah.
So I am in gratitude to God for them, and I know they are there because I've been communicating with them. And I am seeing the answer every single time that they give me something that makes me know they are listening.
Yeah, it's powerful. And when you can actually experience it for yourself, then you get to this place where no one can tell you different. And they can think you're crazy as all get out, but until they've experienced what you've experienced.
Yeah. And it's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me if people want to think I'm crazy. It won't be the first time.
Exactly.
But in meditating, and you could also call it praying, but I mean, not just praying, dear God, da, da, da. I mean, really like being in prayer in the state of meditation has been really helpful as well, because it's really going deep down in and connecting to that God source that is within you.
Yeah. And really learning how to listen to your body. That's been the biggest thing for me, is our body is our temple. That is the only place that you need to seek God or that higher consciousness. And when you can actually start taking the time to listen to what your body is saying, because our body is always telling us exactly how to live and how to be and whatnot, but there's so much noise out in the world that it gets so drowned out.
It does.
And we're constantly kept in this like busy, like we have to keep doing to achieve and be successful. And so we're not human beings anymore. We're human doings.
Yeah, we've become machines just nonstop.
Yeah. And so you have to be bored. People don't know how to be bored anymore. When you're bored, you have that time to like actually listen to that quiet voice in your head that's telling you, maybe you shouldn't go get another slice of cake. Like, like I always say cake because I love cake, but that's my battles is I always hear myself, being a pot smoker, I get the munchies. And so I have this inner voice with myself all the time that's like, you don't need anything right now. And that's my higher God voice. And then there's my ego that's like, oh, but you like that. And so actually having to listen to my body and understand what it's really trying to say in the two voices that we have.
Yeah.
And, if you always choose your higher self, you're always going to stay on the right track.
Right. So in other words, the message is to get more connected to God
through yourself.
Connect to yourself.
Yeah.
Get to know yourself and set really healthy boundaries for yourself, because coming out of church hurt, you feel like you had laid all those boundaries aside.
Yeah.
And so set really strong boundaries for yourself, and don't let anybody bypass those for any reason. Those are your boundaries.
Yeah.
And if somebody can't respect them, then they are not worthy of your time and your attention, because everyone should be respectful of one's boundaries.
Yep. Absolutely. That's been one of my biggest things is a lot of my family don't agree with what I have to say. And I took a lot of offense to it for a long time. And I, tried to almost like force information into their brains, even though they're not there to really receive it. It just kept this, this vicious circle. And I was feeling like hate feelings and like, why don't you see what I'm seeing? Kind of frustration.
Right.
And when I finally let go of that, like, it's not my job to make anyone see what I have to see. It's my job to lead by example. And when they're ready to receive it, they will be there to receive it.
Right.
And so that's given me so much peace. And then just to put up those boundaries and say, we're not going to talk about this because I don't want to argue. I'm not going to argue my truth to you.
Because make we're not going to get anywhere.
It's not going to go anywhere.
It's like beating a dead horse. Like, you're not going to
be left feeling, frustrated, and that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, nothing positive is going to come out of it.
Yeah,
yeah. The last thing I'll say of coming out of church hurt is really to take the time through the process of your meditation and your journaling, however which way you want to do it, but just really take the time to take inventory of your own, not what the Bible says, not what some pastor says, but your own personal values and beliefs. Really go back to that. And this comes back to connecting to yourself. What do you truly believe and what do you truly value?
Yes.
Because that one is the game changer of the healing process. Because for the longest time, coming out of the church hurt, I was so torn with this guilt and shame of, now that I'm not going to church, I'm not going to read the Bible enough because I get so busy. And then I'm not reading the Bible, so I'm not building a relationship with God. And, the typical, and then I finally came to a place where I said, I don't have to religiously read the Bible or religiously pray or religiously do anything if it's not serving me. Because if I'm not serving me, then I'm not serving God.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds egotistical to some people, but that is the truth of it. Because if I'm not at my best, then how am I serving God? Because then I'm not at my best to go and dote on others. Exactly. And the best way we serve God is to go share that love on others.
Yep. So. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing. And I don't have the scripture on hand, but there is literally a scripture that Jesus says, ye are gods.
Yeah.
We are gods too, because we are of the one source.
Yeah.
So people really need to realize that. And I know that's a lot of, what the church teaches you is that there's only one God outside of you. And we need to bring it back and realize that we are made in the image of God. We are of God. And we have the same power that he has. We just have to remember.
Yeah.
And that's what I think this whole shift from 2020 on is just a big awakening for people to remember who we really are and how powerful we really are.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful journey, but it is a journey, I'll tell you.
Oh, I know. I've come a long way in a year and a half. I remember for the longest time coming out of it was just day in and day out. I was just thinking about it and the guilt and the shame and the tears and the sadness and the loneliness and just all the things.
Yeah. For me, it personally became like almost an obsession for a long time, which isn't healthy either. So there's definitely times on my spiritual journey that weren't healthy by any means, but we have to get through those parts of it to, come out the other side and realize, now it clicks and things just start falling into place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, church hurt is a very significant and overlooked thing.
Yeah.
That takes place more often than anyone wants to believe.
Absolutely.
And so just be aware. And if it is happening to you, just know that you don't have to go through that.
No.
In fact, after the church hurt with the first church, there is one person I still talk to occasionally, not too often, from that church because our kids are friends still. And after it had happened, she had shared with me that this wasn't the first time, but that the other mom, it was same scenario. Isolated them, in same person, isolated them into a room, yelled at them. This mom was too scared to go report it and still goes to that church to this day. And this was
man.
several years ago.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show that there's so much shame and guilt and fear to say anything, that people just,
they just let it happen. And
yeah.
Yep. And I think that's, I think it's purposeful, honestly, from the church leaders, that they do those kinds of things to make the congregation fearful, so they don't say anything and they just kind of walk on eggshells, and that's not a good feeling.
No.
I personally want people to really know and take away that just because you don't associate with church and you don't like the church scenario, I don't want that to deter you from building that relationship with the one true creator, God,
right.
source, universe, higher intelligence, whatever you want to put that label on that energy. It has nothing to do with church.
It doesn't.
And that's something that's been the best feeling to me. Like you said, like I've never felt so close to God than now. And it has nothing to do with going any place and being led by a specific person that's, in charge.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's all coming from direct downloads from the creator and our guides.
I did find a new church. It's
It's here, the temple.
It's the Church of Love, the Church of Humanity. That's the church I found.
Yeah.
And that's the one I'm sticking to.
Yeah. I just shared in my story either this morning or last night, and they said the hardest road to walk is the 18 inches from your brain to your heart.
Interesting.
Yep. And it's
It's
so true.
I mean, now I sit here and think about it. Yeah, it's been a long journey. I've been walking from there to here for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And now I've just entered in here, and it's just like, you know, all these aha moments. I get chills talking about it because I can't express enough how much clarity and peace I have now.
The peace is out of this world.
Yeah. It is. It is.
It feels so much better.
I just want everyone to know that the things that I personally have shared and that Staci has shared, these are our own stories, our own journeys, our own experiences.
Yeah.
Take away what you want to from it. We're not here to tell anybody how to do anything, or if you are still going to church and you have a great church and it's a positive experience for you, then keep doing that.
Yeah. But as long as it's truly bringing you joy.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, and that's what I also wanted to reiterate. And I think you were just about to say that, is going to church isn't a bad thing. And I don't want anyone to feel bad that they are going to church, because if that's your happy place and that brings
it was at one point for me
joy, then by all means.
Yeah.
But for those that are having a hard time finding that connection to God, please know that you don't have to find that only in church.
Right. Yeah, to me, that's not what church is for. Where I used to think that's what it was for.
Yeah. Well, church is, honestly, just a little fun fact. The first few churches ever back in 2,000 years ago, they're huge cathedrals that had huge organ systems.
I read about this.
The geometry of how these buildings were built were for sound, and so there was
stained glass windows.
The
geometry
the light,
of
and so you're getting these light fractions and sound, and that was healing. So people actually went to church to lay. There was no pews and one person at the head speaking to the congregation. People laid down through the whole thing and then just took in the sound frequency. And that was what church was.
Amazing.
That's the church that I need to find.
I know the first time I read about it, and then I saw a video about it, and I was like, I want to start a church like that.
Yes. Yes. Maybe we just need to create it one day.
Right? Yeah. Let's go start a church like that. We'll get some really, really good architects and make this magical building. And
yes.
Oh,
just
gosh.
get the sound frequency and the light. Yeah. God, that'd be so amazing.
It's really, bringing that peace to go that walk from here to here.
Yeah.
And not from here to the production.
Yeah, and you're not being dictated to by somebody else's truth. You're literally just silencing everything else out and finding your truth and what you personally need to hear in that moment, not what the leader of the church thinks everybody needs to hear in that moment.
Yeah,
because that's what their agenda is. Right. You get to actually focus on yourself.
Yeah,
and what you personally need on your personal journey.
Yeah. There's a lot of. I don't think I mentioned this throughout the conversation, so I just want to touch on this really quick. There's in the churches, again, moments post church hurt is what I've realized is there's a lot of church leaders that are feeding their own egos above anything else.
Absolutely.
And be on the lookout for that if you are still going to church. Really pay attention to that, because that was one of the things that I really noticed in hindsight, like looking back.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wow, it was really all about them. In fact, just kind of give an example, the first church, so remember the church we both went to after I'd gone to that church, and you'd show up and all the leadership would be there to greet you and say hi and give you that warm welcome. Well, the first one we went to, that was not the case. You would never see them prior to church because they'd all be in the auditorium with the doors closed, rehearsing the production.
Ugh, gag.
And then they wouldn't really, it wasn't too often they'd come out and say hi afterwards. And if you tried to get any of their attention, they didn't have time for you. There's just one example, but yeah, I came to realize there was a lot of their own egos being fed from the stage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a coveted spot.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Staci, for letting me share.
Yeah, thank you. I really hope this kind of just shows you guys how magical life can really be, and how the connection to our Creator is so magical, and how you can come out of church hurt and things on a positive note. And we hope that this brought value to you and kind of opened your eyes to see things from a different perspective. And, leave us comments if you have a different perspective. We are open to conversations, and you can reach out to Jessica or myself. I will link both our Facebook and Instagrams if you guys want to connect with us there and chat further about things, because I know that it can be a very lonely road, and we're here to support you guys in any way we possibly can, and just really open your eyes to some different ways of living life in a peaceful way.
Yeah. Because the more peace you have here, the more connected to God you will feel.
Yep, absolutely. And when you're operating from your heart space, it's magnetic, and it can really transform other people's lives.
Yeah, because Staci got there before I did, and she's been transforming my life.
I'm dragging you along.
Yep, I adore her.
Oh, I adore you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, let us know if you have any questions, concerns, or just want to say hi, because we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you again.
Until next time.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Remember to be kind and compassionate toward yourself and others. Now go out there with an open mind and cultivate a sense of inner peace so you can live a more meaningful life.